Welcome to this advanced part of the session about the testbed technical infrastructure. In this video, I'll talk with Martijn Hendricks, a colleague and senior software developer, and he was involved as one of the core technicians in all trials in the Driver Plus project. We talk about the technical preparations and how they are in line with the trial guidance methodology's steps. These technical preparations, they usually start around the moment you're organizing the trial integration meeting, at least before, because the technicians also have to be at the trial integration meeting. And all this technical work, of course, continues until the trial has been executed. So, Martijn, you with a lot of experience in all these trials, can you explain what is it exactly you did to make these trials happen?
So, in general, you have found certain solutions that will fill a gap inside of your crash management situation. And the main part for the technical side is to facilitate these solutions to be used during your trial. And we can aid that with the testbed technical infrastructure for logging purposes, for usability purposes, and data exchange.
Okay. Then what is it, if you are being involved as a technician, what are the first things you would like to know from the core trial staff, which is probably not so technical?
Yeah, so we mainly focus on the solutions first. So what type of solutions do you now have, and how do you want to function or make them functioning inside of your trial? So how do you see your solutions being used by your practitioners? Is there a direct interaction with them, or is there a operator in between because of it's a complex solution? How do you want to share information? If there are multiple solutions, do you want to share this information between each other? Which specific information is that, and how? And of course, all these solutions require a sort of basic requirement regarding technical or regarding hardware. So, for instance, the internet connection. Certain solutions require an internet connection. Other one requires certain input that they need to have for the trial to actually run correctly. And another one is the logging aspect. So from the evaluation perspective, it might be useful that solution data is also being recorded. So we have to check, how do we all want to get these requirements up and running and get them inside of that requirements analysis.
I also see in this diagram simulators. What is the use of these simulators in your trial setup?
So your trial uses a fictive scenario. It uses a fictive incident, and your simulators can help in providing that fictive incident as well to the solutions and to the practitioners. So for a flooding, for instance, you do not want to flood your complete region in order to trial certain solutions. So your simulators will help you out in facilitating that sense of that there is a flooding inside of your region. Another one would be a GPS tracker that is commonly used for a common operational picture tool to show resources. Yeah. Well, you do not want your personnel or fire or ambulance personnel to be actually driving altogether. So you can have a simulator there to provide that information towards the common operational picture tool to show that. The other one on simulation side is, of course, the non-digital form of simulation. Your trial staff has a lot of information that it can put into the trial for the practitioners to have a better immersiveness of the situation. Think about incident calls, dispatch calls, incident reports, for instance. Those are all kinds of simulation, but a digital simulator can help as well there. Yeah.
Say you as a technician, you are new to the technical infrastructure. For instance, you work as a software developer at a solution provider. How to get started with knowing and connecting to the testbed technical infrastructure?
We have a GitHub repository for the Driver EU. It is there for the technical side to get familiar with all the aspects of the testbed infrastructure. You can have a local version running of the testbed, get familiarized with that, have a hello world example that you can create, and find the suitable adapter for your solution to implement and connect with the testbed technical infrastructure. There are different languages that we provide, like C#, Java, JavaScript, with Python as well, and there's a REST endpoint. You can all visit them at github.com/driver-EU.
And I assume this also applies for simulator providers.
Of course, yeah. This actually with every component that you want to communicate with that general community inside of that trial. So all the components should actually be connected to that testbed technical infrastructure.
And then do you do this before or after the trial integration meeting?
No, you can't do this before the trial integration meeting. You usually have the information necessary to get a good idea of what adapter would be the best one for you and how that testbed is working. You can do it after, but it's always a pre to work something in advance.
Say you are at the start of your trial integration meeting. It's the first time the technicians really meet up with the core trial staff.
Yeah.
How do you as a technician get the technical requirements out of the non-technicians?
Yeah. So what we found very useful was the data exchange diagram. And it's a simple depiction of how these components and roles are interacting with each other for your particular trial. So it's suited for your trial and it's focused on your trial. One of the examples that we show is that it's at the top we have the participant level and they are interacting with your solutions. There are now two solutions that we now have as an example. The one is a common operational picture tool and the other one is a social media analyzer tool. And they are connected to the testbed technical infrastructure.
Can you give an example of the information exchange between the solutions?
Yeah, for instance, practitioners at the social media analyzer tool that use that tool might find it very interesting to have a certain Twitter messages with a certain location, for instance, to be used inside of the incident command management level. So they can pinpoint that inside of the solution, and the solution can then transfer that via the testbed towards the common operational picture tool to show that particular Twitter message. Another part would be then the simulators. So for instance, the requirement for the common operational picture tool, just like what I mentioned, you could do that with a GPS system and all kinds of personnel walking around. But in this case, you can also use, for instance, one of the simulators that output those resource locations, and that can then be, via the testbed infrastructure, be transferred to the common operational picture tool to be visualized.
I also see a social media simulator.
Yes, so you want to have these, the fictive incident in this case is also inside of that social media world. You do not want to have the whole Twitter community to be seeing your particular tweets about a certain forest fire or anything else like that. So this way, there's a simulator that also puts out those Twitter messages on a private account that's only used there. And another one, the third simulator here is is a sort of visualization aspect. It provides a immersive environment of the fictive incident of that forest fire to be shown by the practitioner or to the practitioners via such a way, and it creates a better immersive visualization of what's going on at the incident site.
Okay, so one of the main objectives during the TIM is that data exchange diagram. What are the other topics to focus on from a technical perspective during the trial integration meeting?
Yeah, so if you have your data exchange diagram, or at least the first draft of it, then you might want to already discuss how you want to send out messages and in what format you want to send them out from one solution to the other, or from the simulator to a particular solution. This requires some time to make sure, okay, what is the solution capable of, and what can we provide as a general notion of what is usable as in the correct format. This is also a very good opportunity because it's a face-to-face meeting to connect with the scenario and evaluation side. They are there. They are having ideas for their scenario and their evaluation purposes. It might be very useful to understand what their aim is for that particular trial. At certain points, your technical side might be lacking crisis management information. So the local structures that they use, the hierarchies that they use, and even maybe some standard operating procedures might be very useful for the technical side to understand and bring some more information to the trial.
Why is that scenario so of particular importance for the technicians?
The scenario side focuses the technical side.
Mm-hmm.
So usually a solution has a lot of functionality. It can be used on multiple lines with different users, and having a scenario and having an idea of how the trial would work limits those uses of those functionalities. So you can focus.
Use cases.
Yes, you can focus on these use cases then, making sure that those functionalities for that particular solution are ready for your trial. And it usually says what not to use of a solution. And that also that focuses that solution in its implementation work.
What happens between that TIM and Dry Run 1?
Yeah, well, bear in mind that all these documents are not set in stone. So they might change over time during that period as well. So you mainly focus on the implementation side and testing side of those use cases. And it's a cycle that is continuously growing towards the actual trial that you want to do. So your scenario side might be having some changes, maybe minor, maybe in addition to a new use case, for instance. And there might be technical limitations regarding effort or regarding resources available to do such a thing. So these things, you work that out in between that period of time.
So like the 6-step approach being an iterative process, actually the technical preparations between the TIM and the dry runs is also an iterative process.
Yeah, it is. It is completely iterative, and it needs to have a good communication with all the parties involved.
Dry Run 1. That is the technical test, correct?
Yes, correct. It is the second face-to-face meeting that you have. You focus on the case-by-case testing of those use cases that you've defined. And you most likely will use example data for it as well, because there's example data you probably used for the creation and implementation and testing of that on your individual basis. But now everything comes together so that you can see everything on a technical level coming together.
And you use example data instead of the real scenario because probably the real scenario isn't that far advanced.
True,
right?
yeah.
Okay. Apart from that technical testing, are there other topics which are interesting for you as a technician during Dry Run 1?
Yeah, well, from a technician perspective, you can have multiple facets regarding the infrastructure itself. So the platform infrastructure, not the testbed infrastructure, but the general platform where you are located.
The building.
The actual building. That should be tested as well because it has an internet connection, for instance. It has a sort of local area network that you want to make sure that is capable of running such a trial. So your Dry Run 1 is also, it is very useful for your Dry Run 1 and your Dry Run 2 as well to be inside of that location. Yeah? Have everything ready for the actual setup of the actual trial. Another one would be to find out potential risks and try to mitigate them as soon as possible that you see them. If there is an internet failure or any problems with that, be sure to write it down, document it, and handle it as soon as possible, because your Dry Run 1 gives you the idea of how it should be at your trial. So please make sure that you document this correctly and make sure that you have a good handling of it. Another one would be then to introduce the testbed infrastructure components. So there are 3 major components that can be useful during your trial. It's not
outside the common information space and the common simulation space.
Yes. So we are talking about the trial management tool now, the observer support tool, and the after action review tool. So these 3 tools can be used and are already technically connected, of course, because they're inside of the testbed infrastructure. But they need to have a connection as well with the solution or scenario side or the evaluation side. So your trial management tool needs to be checked here and say, okay, what can we use as a trial staff for this particular trial with this tool? Yeah. And that's the same for the observer support tool and the after action review tool for the evaluation coordination part.
Does it work in that location and do the after action tool indeed receive all the data logs from the solutions, for instance?
For instance, yeah. And it's also a good idea there to introduce those tools as well, because your scenario side is more evolved. It has a better idea of what it wants to go towards for your particular trial. The evaluation coordinator should be having at least an idea of what evaluation needs to be done.
Yeah.
So these components are then introduced at that point and can be checked at that point. Another one would be that not only from a technical perspective, but don't forget that your dry run 1 is additional a face-to-face meeting again.
Mm-hmm.
So all the sides are there. So seeing those solutions actually being used for the particular use cases that you've defined really helps everyone, not only the technical side, to get an idea of how the trial would work. So the main advice here would also be to have these test cases not done as a simple checklist, but follow the flow of your trial so that everyone understands, okay, so we're using this solution here as a start. And then it will send out certain information towards the other solution. We'll go towards that solution and see if every functionality is working there as well.
Now say that you have successfully ended dry run 1. Everything works technically.
Wow, yeah, good.
What is there to do between dry run 1 and dry run 2?
So there are bound to be changes somehow. It might be minor, it might be having a large impact. Your dry run 1 is a sort of mini test. So your scenario has more ideas, has new ideas. It could introduce new functionality. We had one example. During one of the trials, there was a solution provider who had a tool to send out pictures for another solution to be visualizing that. Yeah, and the dry run 1 went okay, the functionality was tested, everything was okay. And then during the dry run 1, there was also the option that that solution could have video sending out as well. But this implemented, of course, a new use case. It is an additional load on everyone to make sure that it is on the evaluation side correctly, scenario side is understanding what's going on, and of course the technical side. So everyone needs to be involved in this process of changing it. And indeed, if all are agreeing, then you can use that. You can make sure that that use case is adapted or added. Yeah.
So small iterations again.
Small iterations again. Yeah, it's the same as with the 6-step approach here.
And then dry run 2. That is the full dress rehearsal.
Yep.
Technically, you already checked it during dry run 1. What is your role as a technician in dry run 2?
The dry run 2 has more simultaneous interaction because there are practitioners using your solutions and you are having more machines there. At a dry run 1 you could use, for instance, one machine for one solution, while at the dry run 2, if there are multiple uses of that solution, you need more machines there. But you can use those preparation steps like in dry run 1. You use the use cases and test cases that you've defined, albeit a little bit altered during the period, but you can use that as a preparation for your dry run 2. You also want to make sure that because of user interaction and participants using your solutions, that there might be some unwanted behavior there. And you might want to make sure that that is also handled correctly for your actual trial. And the infrastructure itself is now putting to the test as well. And we can introduce load tests to actually make sure that the system is working correctly.
Tell more about the load test.
Yeah, load tests are actually certain particular tests to increase the load on a small time frame for the complete system.
Yeah.
And then check if there is any water coming out of a hole somewhere by one of the solutions or by the infrastructure itself or by the testbed components or anything like that.
So that the total setup can withstand actually more use, more loads, more data exchange than that you realistically expect.
Yeah, you first start with a normal setup maybe, and then increase that load ever and ever again. So sending out a lot of images. The simulator that we use for sending out resource locations, we could increase that, ever still making more resource location updates per second. And we found that one of the solution providers had a very hard time in keeping up with that particular load. So they themselves had a good opportunity now to see, okay, what is actually failing at that particular point, so that they could optimize that before the trial.
Yes. So actually, before doing the real trial, you use the system far more intensely as you expect to do it during the trial.
Yeah.
Clear. Are you also there as technicians during the trial?
Yes, of course. There is a time between the dry run 2 and the trial, and in that period it is highly likely that you will change some things, albeit very minor, and especially regarding floor plan, your platform or your location that you're at might not have the complete setup as dry run 2 frozen for that time period until your trial. So again, you need to set it up according to your floor plan. You need to make sure that your use cases are again working correctly, and making sure that everything is okay and prepared for your actual trial run. And during your trial run, of course, we're still talking about software. There might be several changes or might be several unwanted behaviors inside of your system.
Yeah.
We are on close monitoring these systems and making sure that everything is working accordingly inside of your trial. If everything is working okay, everything working as planned, then we are only on a monitoring role. But if there are some things going on, then we need close communication with the trial director. So he's actually running the complete scenario script with the solution providers at hand and with the evaluation coordinator, of course, to make sure that all these things, all these weird things that happen are documented correctly and are resolved correctly within the current time of the trial.
And then during the evaluation phase, what is the role of technicians?
The things I mentioned regarding weird things going on during your trial needs to be documented. And because of it's a stressful situation, usually it's some notes, but it requires a good documentation for the evaluation coordinator to understand what's going on. If there was a message 5 minutes delayed, it has an impact on your evaluation side, or it might have it. You need to at least make sure that your evaluation coordinator knows of these things. So this documentation is very important. The other one, mostly important, is the storing of data. So all the logs of your solutions, of the components that you have used inside of the testbed infrastructure, all these things need to be handed over towards the evaluation coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
Your technical side is responsible for that. And there is a process or a procedure that we do during the trial as well. Usually you've divided your trial into blocks or sections or something like that. And at the end of each block, we ask all the technical guys to store the logs already, to make sure that it's out of the running system. Because if there is a crash with one of the solutions or one of the components, you might want to already have those logs because it might be removed during such a crash. And handling that data towards the evaluation coordinator is one of those important aspects. And having support on that data is also one of the things that we do at the evaluation phase.
Thank you. Thank you. This was
More than welcome.
Very informative, at least for me. I hope for you as well, as one of the learners in the training module. Note that apart from the information which is available in this session and also on GitHub, on the developer documentation, you could always contact a center of expertise to help you with technical support during the organization of your trial. If you want to know more about these centers of expertise, go to session 6.1. There's a whole list of who to contact where. For us, thanks.
Yeah.
And goodbye.
Goodbye.